Some stories begin with a choice. Others begin with a mistake. And then, there are the stories that begin before you even realize you're a part of them. The ones that are already unfolding in the shadows of your life, waiting for the moment you finally notice. By the time I noticed, it was too late. I wasn't looking for love that night. I wasn't looking for anything at all. Just another walk through the city, just another night trying to clear my mind, trying to forget the feeling that my life was slipping through my fingers like sand. But love found me. And it never let go. It was raining. Not hard, not enough to make me hurry home. Just that slow, steady drizzle that turns the world into something muted, something heavier than it should be. The kind of rain that makes you feel like you're walking through a dream you don't remember falling into. I should have noticed the silence first. A city is never silent. There's always something, the hum of traffic, the murmur of voices, the distant wail of a siren. But that night, everything had stopped. No cars. No footsteps. No rustling of wine through the alleys. Just the slow, steady dripping of rainwater from the rooftops, the sound of my own breath in the empty air. That was when I saw her. She was standing beneath a broken street lamp, where the flickering light cut her into pieces, one moment there, the next gone, like the city itself was trying to erase her. Her dress was red. Not bright, not cheerful. A deeper shade. The kind of red that soaks into the pavement and never washes away. Her face was tilted slightly downward, her hair spilling over her shoulders, half concealing her features. But I could feel it, her eyes were locked onto me. Not looking at me. Looking through me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring back. Long enough for the rain to soak through my jacket, long enough for the cold to set in. Long enough for something deep in my mind to whisper, walk away. But I didn't. Because she smiled. It was small. Subtle. Just the barest curve of her lips. But it felt like something shifting beneath the surface of a frozen lake. A crack running through something solid, something safe. A signal, a call, an invitation. I should have turned around. I should have walked away without looking back. I should have trusted the instinct curling in my stomach like something rotten. But I didn't. And that was my first mistake. Because when I blinked, she was closer. I hadn't seen her move. I hadn't heard a single footstep. But she was no longer standing beneath the street lamp. She was standing just outside the glow of it, where the shadows stretched long and deep. Close enough that I could see her face more clearly now. And that was when I realized she was too beautiful. Not in the way that draws you in. In the way that makes your breath catch, that makes something in the back of your mind start screaming. The way a fire might look beautiful just before it engulfs you. Then she spoke. Only 2 words. My name. And that was when everything changed. There's a moment, when you hear your own name spoken in the dark, where the world tilts just slightly. Like stepping off a stair that isn't there. Like waking up and realizing the door to your bedroom is open when you know you closed it. That's how it felt when she said my name. I didn't respond at first. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like the air had thickened around me, pressing in. I should have asked how she knew me. I should have asked who she was. But I didn't. I just stood there. She took another step forward. Slow. Unhurried. Her dress clung to her frame, darkened by the rain, but she didn't seem cold. Didn't seem wet. Like the night hadn't touched her at all. I finally found my voice. Or maybe it found me. Do I know you? The question felt wrong the second it left my lips. Too small. Too simple for what was happening. Because the answer wasn't yes, and it wasn't no. It was something else. She smiled again. Wider this time. And she said, "You will." There was something about the way she spoke. Not like a threat. Not like a promise. Like a fact. Like something that had already been decided. My pulse hammered in my ears. My body screamed at me to move, to step back, to leave. But I stayed. She raised her hand then, palm up, like she was waiting for me to take it. Like she had all the time in the world. I don't know why I did it. I don't know why my own hand lifted, why my fingers brushed against hers. But the second they did, the city around me changed. Not slowly. Not in a way that made sense. One blink, and the neon lights above us flickered out, swallowing the street in darkness. Another blink, and the buildings around us stretched taller, their windows vanishing, their doors disappearing. The sound of the rain faded. The silence deepened, pressing in on all sides. And she was still there. Closer now. Her fingers curled around mine, too cold, too smooth. Her smile never faltered. But her eyes. They weren't hollow anymore. They were hungry. I pulled my hand back. Or at least, I tried to. But her grip tightened, just for a second, just enough to let me know that I wasn't the one making the decisions anymore. Then she let go. The moment she did, the city snapped back into place. The lights. The sounds. The street as it was before. But something had shifted. Something was different. And I knew that I had just made my second mistake. Because when I turned to walk away, she was already waiting for me at the end of the street. And this time, she wasn't alone. There are certain rules in life. Things we assume are constant. When you step forward, the ground will be there. When you turn a corner, the world will still make sense. But that night, the city itself felt wrong. I kept walking. Not running, just walking. Fast enough to create distance, slow enough to pretend nothing had changed. But I could feel her watching me. And worse. I could feel the others. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way the air felt heavier, the way the shadows stretched a little too far. But then I saw them. Figures, just barely visible in the alleys, standing in the glow of flickering streetlights. Still. Unmoving. Watching. I glanced back at her, the woman in red. She hadn't moved, still standing at the far end of the street. But the moment my eyes met hers, she tilted her head. Just slightly. And every single shadow in the alleyway stepped closer. I didn't stop. I didn't let myself look again. I focused on the street ahead, on the familiar landmarks of the city, the diner on the corner, the old bookstore, the train station up ahead. I just needed to reach the station. To get out of here. To prove to myself that this was all in my head. But then, I noticed something else. The city was empty. Not just quiet. Not just late night empty. Wrong empty. No late night workers locking up their shops. No cars rolling through intersections. No distant laughter from bars closing for the night. Just nothing. The deeper I walked into the city, the less real it felt. Storefronts looked familiar, but their signs were blank. Traffic lights changed colors, but there were no cars waiting for them. The world was detailed, but lifeless, like a stage set after the actors have all gone home. And then my phone buzzed. For the first time since I saw her, something normal. Something real. I grabbed it, desperate for the feeling of plastic and glass in my hand. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach turned to ice. One new message. No number. No name. Just 2 words. Turn around. I didn't. I wouldn't. But my reflection did. In the darkened window of the bookstore beside me, I saw myself standing frozen on the sidewalk. My own face. My own clothes. My own wide, panicked eyes. But my reflection wasn't facing forward anymore. It was staring right at me. And then, it smiled. I should have run. I should have turned and sprinted until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed into the real world, the world where reflections don't move on their own, where shadows don't watch you from the alleys, where women with perfect smiles don't appear in empty streets and whisper your name like a promise. But I didn't. Because when my reflection smiled, I felt something I didn't expect. It wasn't just terror. It wasn't just the sickening pull of wrongness clawing at my gut. It was warmth. For the first time that night, I felt warm. Like the city had been cold all along, like I'd been walking through something hollow and frozen without realizing it. But now there was heat against my skin. A pulse, slow and steady, somewhere just beneath the surface of this nightmare. I turned my head, just slightly. just enough to see her in the reflection beside me. The woman in red. She wasn't standing at the end of the street anymore. She was right there, inches away, her breath against my neck. But it wasn't her that made my knees weaken. It was the way she looked at me. Not like a stranger. Like she knew me. Like she had always known me. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. And for one insane moment, I wasn't. Her hand lifted, fingers grazing my jaw, tilting my head toward her, toward the version of us in the window, where our reflections looked too perfect, where my own mirrored eyes had turned just a shade too dark, where the world behind the glass seemed better. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Or maybe it was hers. Maybe, for the first time, we shared the same heartbeat. Her lips parted, her voice barely more than a breath. "Stay." It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation. And for a moment, a brief, dangerous moment, I wanted to say yes. The world in the reflection was different. Warmer. Softer. The neon lights weren't flickering anymore, they glowed steady, like candles at a dinner table. The street behind us wasn't empty, it was alive, filled with shapes moving, talking, dancing in the golden haze of a world untouched by loneliness. And we were there too. Together. I watched as my reflection reached for her, fingers tangling in the silk of her hair, lips brushing against hers like a secret. And then he looked at me. Not at her. Not at our perfect, impossible world. At me. And his expression twisted. Not with fear. Not with longing. With warning. Don't. The glass shattered. 1,000 fractures burst across the window, splintering our reflections, turning them into something broken, something unnatural. And the woman. She wasn't beside me anymore. She was behind me. Hands on my shoulders. Breath against my ear. Her voice, still soft. Still inviting. "You almost had it," she murmured. "But you're not ready yet." Then the warmth was gone. The city snapped back into its hollow, frozen silence. And I was alone again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I walked home, or at least, I think I did. The city felt like a maze, endless streets folding into one another, every alley identical, every building unfamiliar even though I'd lived here for years. But eventually, somehow, I found my apartment. I locked the door behind me. Twice. My hands were still shaking. I kept telling myself it wasn't real. That I'd imagined her. That the glass in that window had never shattered, that the reflection wasn't wrong, that the warmth in my chest when she touched me was just adrenaline. But then I saw it. On my kitchen counter. Right where my keys should have been. A single red hair. I swallowed hard. Reached for it. Rolled it between my fingers just to prove it was real, just to feel its softness against my skin. And then my phone buzzed. A notification. A picture. My breath caught in my throat. It was a photo of me. Standing outside the shattered window. But I wasn't alone. She was there, standing beside me, smiling. Like she belonged there. Like we had always been together. And the timestamp. 3 a.m. I didn't take that photo. I don't even remember pulling out my phone. But the worst part, the thing that made my stomach drop, made my vision blur, made my legs give out beneath me. The me in the photo wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at her. And he was smiling back. At first, I thought it was just me. That maybe I was losing track of things, maybe I was exhausted, maybe my mind was fraying at the edges. But then the city changed. Not all at once. No, that would have been too easy to notice, too easy to escape. It happened slowly, like rot spreading under the surface, waiting for the moment you'd least expect to break through. It started with small things. The streetlights flickering in patterns I couldn't quite understand. Storefronts that had been abandoned for years suddenly looked occupied. Mannequins in dusty windows shifting ever so slightly when I wasn't looking. The distant hum of voices where there should have been silence. Then it got worse. I passed the same newspaper stand 3 times in a row, on different streets. An old man selling roses on the corner watched me too closely, his eyes too knowing, as if he'd seen me before. As if he was waiting for me to remember him. And then there were the posters. They weren't there before. I swear they weren't. Missing person. My name. My face. And the date I had first met her. That's when I knew. It wasn't just her that wouldn't let go of me. The city itself was changing, shifting, bending around me like a maze with no exit. Like it had claimed me. And no one else seemed to notice. I tried asking someone, just a stranger on the street, if they saw the posters. If they knew who had put them up. They smiled politely. But their eyes were empty. What posters, they asked. And suddenly, I wasn't sure what I was more afraid of, the possibility that they were lying, or the possibility that the city was only showing them to me. Then, the air changed. It smelled sweet. Like perfume. Like roses. Like her. I turned around. And there she was. Standing at the end of the street, beneath the flickering glow of a neon sign. Waiting. Smiling. And this time, I couldn't tell if she was the one moving toward me, or if the city itself was pulling me closer to her. I ran. I don't remember deciding to. My legs just moved, my body acting on pure instinct, pure terror. I turned away from her, away from that smile, that perfume, that impossible presence, and bolted down the street. The city was alive around me. The neon signs flickered faster, as if warning me. The pavement seemed softer beneath my feet, like I was running on something that wasn't quite solid. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, reaching for me, twisting and bending in ways that didn't match the light. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just needed to get away. But the city wouldn't let me. I should have reached the main road in seconds. My apartment was only 3 blocks away. I knew these streets. I knew every turn, every shortcut. But somehow, no matter which way I went, I kept ending up on the same street. The street where I met her. The street with the flickering neon sign. The street where she was still standing. Waiting. Smiling. I stumbled to a stop, my chest heaving, my vision swimming. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I turned and ran again, faster, harder. Took a different route. A left instead of a right. Through an alley. Over a fence. Past a building I knew I had never seen before but somehow remembered. And yet, when I emerged from the alley, I was back on the same street. Same flickering neon sign. Same impossible woman. Only this time, she was closer. I gasped for breath, my legs shaking, my mind screaming at me to move, but my body refused. I tried again. Turned back. Took a cab, even. Told the driver to take me anywhere, anywhere but here. He didn't ask questions. Just nodded. Started driving. I watched the city blur past the windows. The same streets. The same lights. The same distorted reflections in the glass. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. And yet, when the car finally slowed to a stop, I was back. The same street. Only now, the driver was gone. The car was empty. And she was standing right outside my door. Waiting. Smiling. I didn't run this time. I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew. The city wasn't going to let me leave. The streets, the buildings, the very air itself had folded in on me, trapping me in some invisible web. And at the center of it all, was her. She took a step forward. Slow. Deliberate. Like she had all the time in the world. And when she spoke, her voice was the softest thing I'd ever heard. You look tired. I didn't answer. My throat was dry. My body was shaking. She took another step. Closer now. Close enough for me to smell the faint trace of roses on her skin. You don't have to run anymore. I should have moved. Should have turned away. But there was something in her voice, something warm. Something safe. She smiled, tilting her head just slightly, the way someone does when they're looking at someone they care about. Come with me, she whispered. I can take you home. Home. The word sent a chill through me. Because for a moment, I wanted to believe her. She reached out, slowly, gently. Her fingers hovering just over my wrist, waiting. Not forcing. Not grabbing. Just waiting. "You're not lost," she murmured. "You were never lost. You were just looking for something." And I felt it then. This pull, something inside me unraveling, some deep exhaustion that I hadn't even realized was there. She wasn't threatening me. She wasn't chasing me. She was offering me something. Comfort. A place to rest. A way out. And in that moment, with the city pressing in all around me, its streets looping in endless, impossible patterns, its lights flickering like a dying heartbeat, I almost said yes. Almost. I was so close. Her fingers hovered just above my skin, waiting, patient, gentle, warm. And I wanted to let go. To believe her. To let her lead me home. But then, something changed. The air around us shifted. The city seemed to exhale, a low, distant hum vibrating through the pavement, through the buildings, through me. I blinked. And she was gone. The street was gone. The neon lights, the distant hum of traffic, the impossible looping streets, all of it vanished. For a moment, there was nothing. Just darkness. Just silence. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Mine. I was walking. But I hadn't taken a step. I felt the cold air against my skin. I saw my breath curling in the night. And then, I turned the corner. And I saw her. Standing under the flickering street lamp. Waiting. Smiling. Exactly like before. Every single detail the same, the way her dress moved in the breeze, the way her eyes glowed just a little too brightly in the dark, the way she tilted her head like she had been expecting me. I couldn't breathe. I knew what was about to happen. Because it already had. The city had reset. It had swallowed me whole. And now, I was right back where I started. Trapped. She smiled, and whispered the same words she had the first time we met. "I was wondering when you'd find me."